and welcome to this live video on my channel. My name is Busi, a South African who moved to Canada in 2019 with her husband and 2 kids. And today we're going to be talking about life in Canada, the cost of living, looking specifically at salaries versus that cost of living. Does it make sense for you to pack everything up and move to Canada or not? So please let me know as you are jumping in on the live. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And if you are watching the video after the live has started or during another day, please also say hello. Say hello in the video, in the comments. Say hello in the comments and let me know where you are watching from. So today I want us to go through the cost of living. So I'm going to be looking at the top 4 provinces in Canada. So we're going to be talking about the top 4 provinces in Canada, which are Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, and Alberta. So the provinces that I have showing on the screen now, we're going to be looking at the cost of living for those provinces, comparing different towns within each province. So as you have questions, please do let me know, and we will definitely have a chat about them because I want this to be, a very interactive conversation. So please say hi, ask questions, and let's get the show on the road. So hi, Joel. And Mpo says, I'm watching from Springs in Gauteng. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for joining. So one of the other topics that we're going to be covering today when it comes to the salaries, I'm going to be talking or sharing rather the salaries for the average salaries for sales representative, truck drivers, software engineers, and nurses in all of these top 4 provinces that I just mentioned. So I had a look at the top 10 list of the jobs that a lot of newcomers come to Canada for or work in, and these were part of that top 10. So I just picked randomly 4 of them, so we don't spend too much time on this live today. And one of the topics, or job roles rather, not topics, the software engineers one, I picked because there was someone who commented on the live video. Let me just pull the comment up quickly. So Bullx Traders had said, Simingalento, South Africa, Sijahile ukubona impilo yase-Canada, Sabaweli, future software engineers, here we come, Bayishan. So that influenced me picking software engineers from that top 10 list. So in future, if you would see a topic maybe that I've shared that I'm going to be talking about and you want me to dive into a specific thing, maybe comment on a video, DM me something on Instagram. But yeah, so that's how I ended up focusing on software engineers, but they are part of the top 10 list. And okay, so let us jump right in and have a look at life in Canada as it pertains to the cost of living in the top 4 provinces. And I'm just sharing my screen quickly, so please bear with me. Okay, so you should be seeing my screen now. Okay, so hi Evans, you're watching from Centurion in Gauteng. Clara watching from Rivonia in Santon. I used to do my hair, like before I moved to South Africa, I had dreadlocks. I had locks and I used to go to a salon that was in Rivonia in Santon. Like I miss that place a lot. Masalele says, hi, I'm watching from Lesotho. Notification gang, yeah. Watching from Mooikloof in Pretoria. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Thank you all for watching. Okay, so let's get into the cost of living in Ontario. Now, Ontario is the province that I moved to with my family. I've lived in 4 different towns here in Ontario. And so the top 2 cities that new immigrants tend to move to when they move to Canada is Toronto and Ottawa. And Ontario specifically is one of those provinces that get a lot more of the immigrants that are moving to Canada come to Canada. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot more of the hi. So hi, Precious, watching from KZN, and Dikeledi watching from Pretoria. Thank you for watching. So in 2021, Ontario saw more than half of the immigrants that moved through the PR, that moved with PR, come to Ontario. Like, I was quite surprised when I saw that number, because the government will typically say they are looking maybe for over 400K people to come to the country. And if over half of those people are coming to Ontario, I do think it's very important to look at other towns, that you could possibly move to. And so, like I just mentioned, Toronto is the number one town that people will tend to move to. And then the second city, Toronto's a city, not a town, my bad. The second city would be Ottawa. But I chose to compare Toronto to St. Catharines, as you see on the screen, because I moved to Canada and I moved to the Ontario region. So I also moved to, the greater Toronto area. So I moved to the Toronto area, essentially, because that's what you know about, especially if you don't know anyone who already lives in Canada, and you're very limited in terms of the information that's out there. Because at the time that we moved, there weren't as many people as I see today on YouTube just sharing about their own experiences, where they live. And we ended up narrowing it down to Ontario. And then in Ontario, we just chose Toronto because that was where we knew. But we knew we didn't want to stay directly in the city, because that would be like staying like directly in the city in Johannesburg, which we have done. And it can be expensive because you are somebody who is paying for being around certain things, and we are people who didn't really make use of much of that Johannesburg, I'd say, nightlife and all the nice things that come with staying in a city that big. So when we moved to Canada, we just thought, yeah, no, staying directly in Toronto doesn't make sense. And we ended up living in Oakville for 2 years. This is my friend, hi Zintle. Thank you for watching. I love how you're just jumping in here like, let me act like I don't know this girl. Like, hey, watching from Pretoria. Love it, love it, love it. Hey, girl. Okay, so Toronto and St. Catharines. St. Catharines is in the Niagara region, which is where I moved almost a year ago and where we purchased a home. As you can see on this comparison here, and these are estimates, right? These are estimates that are based on the average spend that the reports that I was looking at when I was pulling this information showed. So you could potentially be much lower in terms of how much you spend in the different categories on here, just based on your personal circumstances and your lifestyle. So these amounts are that average from the lowest that you could see a random person or an average person spend, and the highest that you could see an average person spend when it comes to childcare and education, healthcare, utilities, food, transportation, houses, entertainment, and miscellaneous expenses. And you might be looking at this and you're thinking, Lucy, but doesn't everybody say healthcare is free in Canada? Like, why is there a healthcare category on there? So there's a healthcare category on there because basic healthcare in Canada is free. So if you would need to go to the physician, which is like a general practitioner in South Africa, you wouldn't have to pay to see them. Maybe they refer you to the emergency department or to a different specialist. And I've had, a couple of those scenarios happen. You wouldn't have to pay. But when it comes to things like your dental work, so taking care of your teeth, your eyes, that you would need extra coverage for. And that comes in the form of, or can come in the form of health insurance, or you could pay cash. And a lot of people will get their health care covered under their employer. Like, there will be some form of insurance, health insurance, that's available, similar to medical aid if you are from South Africa or a country where your workplaces typically provide that as one of the benefits. Oh, so hi, the Mamoose, watching all the way from Lesotho. Thank you for joining. So one thing I wanted to add on that healthcare portion is that for my family specifically, the only amount that we end up spending on an average month is on the health insurance, which is usually it's covered by the employers. And then if you want to add additional things, so for example, Owetu, our oldest son, he recently started his treatment for orthodontics. So if you would want something like orthodontics added to your plan, the basic plan that the employer would give you, you would pay a bit of an extra amount for that, but it wouldn't be like over $50 a month. And if you both have plans, then you work it out between you. So if there's two people working in the family. So hi Shamim, I'm watching from Hartebeer Sport. Thank you for watching. Okay, so when it comes to housing, if you are looking to move to Toronto and you are a family of 4, so I made this for a family of 4 and an individual. So if you are a family of 2, you might consider that, okay, when it comes to housing, chances are you could be fine with accommodation that would be for an individual, because maybe you are, your partners and you share one room already, you're sleeping in one bed, so you wouldn't necessarily need more than one room. So you can look at those averages and just pick out what makes the most sense for you and your specific situation. And then the average in Toronto can be between 2,500 to 4,500 per month. And I encourage you to just take a screen grab of this if there's a province on here that you are looking to move to, because I'm not going to go through every single one of the details. If you have a question, though, on something that you are seeing on the screen, I encourage you to please, please, please just ask. Let's talk about it, and I will answer it to the best of my knowledge as somebody who lives here. Okay, so Mpitseng N says, love this. Thanks a lot, Lucy. Oh, you are so welcome. I understand how difficult it can be to try and figure out what can the cost of me living in this place look like. Because if you're somebody who might end up moving the way we didn't have jobs when we moved to Canada. And we looked for jobs after moving, but it was very important for us to know how much are we going to need to spend on a month-to-month basis. And when I have gone through all 4 of the provinces that we're looking at today, I have a breakdown where I'm giving a summary of everything to make it easier for you to see that, okay, if I move to Ontario specifically and I move to Toronto or St. Catharines, how much would I be looking to spend? So Christian says Limpopo is present. Nice. Love it. Okay, so I don't see any questions coming in specifically for Ontario, but like I said, Ontario, top 2 most popular cities that immigrants move to in Ontario, which is the number 1 most popular province that immigrants tend to move to, is Toronto and Ottawa. But I'm giving you a comparison between Toronto and St. Catharines, just so you can see that there are towns that exist in Ontario that are not super far from Toronto if you would want to be close to the greater Toronto area that cost a lot less. But I know it can be difficult if you are not aware. And I don't have a town tour yet of St. Catharines, but that will be coming up on the channel very soon. Okay, so Norman says, hi, Busi. I'm watching from Maboneng, Johannesburg, SA. I'm privileged to be part of this conference. Some people pay a fortune for this. Thank you. You are welcome. You are very welcome. Please do share this video with other people you think they might find it useful, because it took a minute to pull all these numbers together, but I just realized that so many people often ask me this, and let's dive in and see what the numbers look like. Clara says, funny how I have been checking out St. Catharines. St. Catharines is one of those towns that every time I go there, I am just surprised at how big it is and how beautiful it is. There's a lot of different sides to it. And when we first went there, we went to a site that looked more industrial because we were going to see a company that my husband would have been starting work at. So we were like, oh, okay, this is St. Catharines, only to go back a different time and see a totally different side of it. So St. Catharines is a very lovely place. Very, very, very lovely place. Okay, Zintle says, watching from Durban. Thank you, Busi, for this awesome channel. You are welcome. Okay, so let's move on to British Columbia. British Columbia is the second province that a lot of immigrants tend to move to. And when they are moving to British Columbia, so Mpitseng, sorry, says, sorry, I might have missed it. What did you cover under childcare and education? I thought it was free. Oh, yes. Thank you for asking that question. Education is free in Canada if your child is going to a public school. So this average is given for a family. If you would have a child that needs to go to preschool, so before they start kindergarten, which they can start when they turn 4. So for example, when my family and I moved, our youngest was 2. They were 2 years old and they needed to go to preschool. That is not covered. You have to pay that out of pocket. And I do think there's people who might not be aware of that. So that's what that cost is. And if you don't have a child who would be under 4, who can't go to a public school, then you can just disregard that childcare and education portion. If you would be looking for your child to go to a private school, though, because private schools do exist, that amount also takes that factor into consideration. So if you're looking to take your child to a private school, they differ in terms of what they can cost based on the province that you're in. So that just gives you an estimate of low, high, and as well as childcare, like I mentioned, which is not covered. So if that doesn't apply to you, you can just ignore that portion and not have a look at it. Okay, so Jabulile says, we are a family of 6, and I think there is a possibility for us to move there. I look forward to welcoming you to Canada. And if you're a family of 6, I think there's also going to be things that you will just have to kind of inflate just a little bit. Or I could also say, if you are a family maybe that is not, I'll say maybe too extravagant, like in their expenses, like the things that you spend money on, and your lifestyle is maybe on the conservative side, you potentially could take that higher end of the family of 4. Take that higher end, because let me just go back to Ontario, which I have a bit of a better bearing on because I've never lived in British Columbia, and I'm just going off what I know from the internet, what I've found searching on the internet. So for example, housing, Toronto, 4.5, you could get a place to stay for a family of 6 that would fit 4,500, right? So you could look at that larger bracket for this, but just bear in mind that your personal circumstances and your family's lifestyle is going to impact that number. So it might end up being a bit more, or it could still fit within what I'm sharing right now for a family of 4. So just bear that in mind. Okay, so Jabuli, oh, nice. You're watching from Oshawa, Ontario. Let me know, are you looking to move to a different place, maybe a different town? I have a friend who moved to Oshawa last year. She purchased a home in Oshawa. So that is nice. So Makabelo is watching from Soweto. Thank you for joining. Tammy says federal government has teamed up with the provincial governments to lower childcare fees. It's now $10 a day in some provinces. That's a plan that they are hoping to achieve countrywide. Oh, yes. Thank you for bringing this up, Tammy. Tammy is my husband, by the way, who is literally sitting upstairs, I guess, watching the same live. So thank you for joining, Tammy. And thank you for bringing this up. I forgot to mention it. And, we don't have a child who's in that level anymore. But yes, the government has lowered childcare fees because so many people are just struggling to make that payment. And another thing I do want to highlight as well when it comes to the childcare, especially if you're going to be a new immigrant moving to Canada with your family, is that first year, depending on the province and the region that you end up moving to, you might have 100% of your childcare fees covered. So for example, we moved to Ontario, right? And then we lived in the Greater Toronto area, part of the what was the region we lived in, Tammy? The DSBN. I cannot believe, no, DSBN is a school board. Oh, Halton. We lived in the Halton region. Oh my gosh, it hasn't been that long, and I've already forgotten which region we lived in before moving to Niagara. So in that region, you could have 100% of the entire childcare fees for that first year you move to Canada covered, because what they do when they are evaluating whether you are eligible to receive that benefit or not, they look at the previous tax year. What were you paying in tax? what bracket were you in from a tax perspective, and you are somebody who was not in Canada. So because you were not in Canada, that literally shows a big fat 0, and that makes you eligible to have your child be covered from a childcare perspective. And this does not include the child benefit that you would get monthly, because there's another benefit where you can apply and they are giving it to you so you can just have the normal expenses that you would need for a child. And it could be like $300 or above per month per child, but that is a separate benefit to the one I'm talking about for childcare. So if you would be looking to move to Canada in a particular province, they will be different in the way that they do things. So if you have somebody who is a little one that will be needing to go to childcare, just make sure you are looking that the region you're going to maybe has something that they will be giving in terms of that. Okay. So British Columbia, the top two cities that newcomers tend to move to when they come to or go to British Columbia in Canada is Vancouver and Victoria. And those are the two that I had chose to highlight on here. And I do think they also give you a very nice difference in terms of what you could expect to spend from the various categories that are on here, which are similar to the previous slide that we just looked at for Ontario. And we're going to be looking at British Columbia, Quebec, and Alberta. Quebec and Alberta. My mistake. We are on British Columbia right now. So yeah, if you have any questions, like I said, about any of the information that is showing up on here, please do let me know and we can get into it. But please remember to just maybe take a screen grab so you can look at the various costs at your own time, or the video will be saved on the channel so you can come back to it as well. So Tando is watching from Randfontein. Hi, and thank you for joining, Tando. Okay, so let's move on over to the next province, which is Quebec. Now, Quebec is that province that is, it has French as their main language. So if you are somebody who speaks French, this might be a province that you look at and you think, okay, I would love to move to Quebec, but it's not exclusive to French-speaking people. You can move to Quebec if you don't speak French. I think it would be a bit easier if you had an understanding of the language, but if you don't, you can also enroll. Like the government offers services where you can learn a new language. So if you are moving to a province like Quebec, you would have that opportunity to learn a new language and just get to know the language that is spoken mostly in the province that you would be moving to. So in Quebec, a lot of immigrants who move to Quebec choose to either move to Montreal and Quebec City. And looking at all of the different provinces that we've gone through till now, one of the things that and this is my personal opinion, like this is not something I went and read somewhere, but I do think that what influences where people end up moving is the fact that it's the most known places. So when you think of Canada and you think of Ontario, which city do a lot of people tend to know? That city will be Ontario. That city will be Toronto. Sorry, not Ontario, but that city will be Toronto. And I think that ends up influencing just how much people will end up moving to a particular place. So I think that is what ends up happening with a lot of these provinces. And because if you're new to Canada, you've never maybe heard much about it, you're going to rely on, okay, what is maybe the capital city or the biggest city or the most diverse city, for example. Because when we look at Toronto specifically, that's in Ontario, Toronto has more than half of its residents belonging to a visible minority, which I think is a nice pool, but I do also think is influenced by the fact that it is Toronto. And there's a lot of people who end up moving to the area who could have moved somewhere else if they were aware of all of the other towns that do exist. So if you are looking to move to Quebec, again, take a screenshot so you can compare the different costs. And if you have any questions, because the factors that I looked at are quite similar for all 4 provinces. And yeah, I think one of the things that really stood out for me with Quebec is the housing costs. Like, look at those housing costs compared to what we just saw for Ontario. They are looking very delicious, very, very delicious indeed, very delicious. So, okay, Piteng says, with regards to housing, $1,800, for example, would be like an apartment. So yeah, like the baseline that I took was for looking at apartments. So you would be looking at an apartment, or you could also be finding some type of a townhouse, maybe an attached house, and that could be at 1,800, and it could be 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms. But the baseline I took was for apartments, but you could find something that's not an apartment at around that cost. Because let me just go back to Toronto or Ontario, and the reason I'm doing that is because from a pricing perspective, I have a better bearing for Ontario and the towns this side because I've lived in a couple of them already. So I'll look at St. Catharines specifically, which is the region. It's a town, a city that's in the region that I'm in. So if for a family of four, you look at between 1,200 to 2,500, you could find a townhouse that could fit that 2,500 mark. 2 bedroom, maybe actually 3 bedroom in St. Catharines. Yeah, 3 bedroom in St. Catharines is possible. So it's a mix of both, but mostly I was looking at apartments just to kind of give you an entry into that. And then Tammy says, 4 options exist: basement, townhouse, standalone, and apartments. It's also dependent on the demand. So you could get an apartment for the same price as townhouse. Yeah, definitely depends. It depends on the location. It depends on what the house maybe will have in terms of things like appliances and all of the things that you could find in a house. And the basement options, I mean, there's basements that have 2 bedrooms in them. They're called basement apartments. So there's a lot of options for sure. But I based this amount more or less around looking at an apartment, but you can definitely add it to a home. Okay, so let me see if there's any other questions. So again, don't forget, take a screen grab so it's easier for you to go back and just look at the different categories on here. We will be going through a summary that's going to show you all of these towns in one place, which I think will make it easier for you to compare. Okay, and that is going to come after this Alberta one. So Alberta is the last one that we're going to be looking at this point, and then we'll go into a summary of all of the towns, just so it's easier for you to see which town and province maybe might make a bit more sense. And then we'll jump into the salaries. I think that is also a nice and exciting one. Okay, so let me see. Question or comment rather from Clara, and she says, we are a family of 4 with 2 boys, a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. I've seen apartments that are nice for max 2,200. Yeah, for sure. You can definitely get very nice apartments. One of the things I will say, so interesting thing with our journey, like coming and living in Canada, when we first arrived, we booked an Airbnb, right? Stayed in it for a month. It was a basement. So we've had the experience of living in a basement for a month. And then we've lived in a detached home. This was before we purchased our own home. We lived in a detached home. We've lived in an attached townhouse. And then we lived in an apartment as well for like 4 months before we moved into our house, like the house that we purchased. And one of the things I can say, and I don't know if this is the case for every single apartment building, but this was a new building. And one thing that it surprised me was the fact that the people below us, like, you know how kids will like play in the house, they can run around and, you know, kids will be kids. The people below us could hear their footsteps, which for me was just, I don't know, like it ended up just being the most uncomfortable situation for living. Like they were nice people, but at the same time, you feel like you're walking on eggshells inside your own space. So I say that to say, do maybe look at the lower grounds, especially if you have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, because ours now, our 2 boys are 10 and 6. And when we lived in that apartment, they were like almost, yeah, they were a year younger because it was the beginning of last year. So just keep that in mind. But I also want to preface that with the fact that apartment buildings are different. So it might just be the one we were in that behaves like that. But I would highly recommend and suggest that just get yourself a lower level floor where you know there's no one around you and below you. There's no one below you where your kids could potentially make a difference, make a noise, not a difference for the people below you. So Christian says, hi, Busi, is tax the same regardless of which province you work in? So no, Canada has federal tax and it has provincial tax. So as Tammy is saying here, the tax differs per province. And that's because you'll get the federal level tax. So when you start working, you get your pay stub and they're listing out the deductions that you're getting. You'll see federal tax and there'll be provincial tax. And the provincial tax will differ based on the province that you are in. So that's another thing you could look at when you are looking at which province you could move to. Just compare the taxes per province and maybe just pick the one that has the lower tax if that makes the most sense for what you are looking for. Peter, basement sounds so gloomy. I've seen basements. Excuse me, I need to drink a bit of water. My mouth is getting a bit dry. But yeah, I personally didn't like the basement experience because of like the windows are super high. You do get light in, but I don't know, man. It felt like I'm closed in. Like it wasn't a nice experience, and it was colder than the normal house. So I would assume in that house the higher level was warmer than the basement because I don't know, like the temperature in the basement was a bit lower, and I just didn't like the light that came in. But I've seen basements that will have like really nice full windows, so it could depend, I guess, on where you're finding a basement. But I would think that if the basement has window sizes that almost look like they are normal windows, you're not going to be paying basement price for that, right? So yeah, basements weren't for me, but I've heard people who said they didn't mind. So it's one of those things where I'm like, maybe you try it out as a short-term rental, see how it feels, and then before you commit to something that is bigger. So Clara says, oh, okay, thank you for highlighting that. You are welcome. Jabulile says, water and lights are paid or not. So if you would stay in an apartment or a condo that has your utilities included, and the last apartment that we lived in before we moved to the house, it was like that. You would pay a base amount for your rent. So let's say your rent is 2,200, you pay 2,200, your water, lights, everything that is utility related would be included in that price. I'm not aware though if it's every single apartment building or condo that does this. So that is something I would say check. But if you are in a standalone home, well, maybe not just standalone, but if you're in a home that's not part of like an apartment building or condos, then yes, you would have to pay for your own water, lights, and heating, and all the things that would come with being in a house. And those are the estimates that are included in the utilities portion on every single one of the slides that I've just shared. So it depends, but if you are going to be in a house that's not part of an apartment building or condos, then yes, you have to pay them separately. But if you are, then you could find that they are already included in your rent. And if you're planning to move into an apartment, I personally would say just prioritize finding ones that have those costs, your utilities included. That wouldn't include your internet though. So if you would need to get like home internet or mobile internet, that would be, that would definitely differ. So yeah, as Tammy says, some basements can be really great though, depends on the design. Yeah, like some basements, they can be quite good, but I think if they feel like you're not in a basement, you are going to spend that amount. You are definitely going to spend an amount that reflects that you're in a basement that is a bit, better than the others. Okay, so I don't see any other questions. Now let's move into the summary. So I think this is another great one where you could just take a screen grab where you have all of these provinces and cities that I just highlighted in the previous slides, where you can see what on average it could cost you an estimate for an individual and a family of four, and then use the previous slides to break things down in a way that would make sense for your specific circumstances and lifestyle. So, like I said, you could be way below this in terms of what you need for your lifestyle and your circumstances, or you could need a bit more. This just gives you a baseline. And what I did on here, if you look at the individual and the family under each city, I took the amounts, added them, and then we have the lower range and the higher range for the average that you would need for an individual. And then just below that, so this is per month, right, where it says PM. And then just below that, that's the per annum. So I added that over 12 months, just so it's easier for you when you're looking at the salaries that we're going to look at in the next slides, to have a mental image of, okay, maybe this could work, or that maybe would need to be different, or this province might make more sense than the next. And I also do want to highlight, there are other provinces that exist, right, in Canada. These are just the ones that immigrants tend to gravitate to a lot more. But I would highly recommend that you just look at other provinces, because there's places that will cost a lot less, so just when people say, oh, Canada is expensive, and you find that the person is literally living in the most expensive city in Canada, and they make it sound as though every single place in Canada is like that. So if you look at the differences between an individual in Toronto and an individual in Calgary, for example, the lower range in Toronto is a bit over 23,000, while the lower range in Calgary in Alberta is around 18,000. So that is a difference, right? And then for a family of four, the lower range, if you would be in Toronto, you could be looking at spending around 70,000, a bit over 70,000. And if you would be in Calgary, or even Edmonton, actually, let's go look at Edmonton and Quebec, 39,000 and 39,000 and 48,000. So there's a very big difference, very, very big difference. Tammy's even laughing at this one. Now that you've touched on the internet, how are the prices compared to South Africa? They are crazy. They are ridiculous. I don't think internet costs here make sense. I don't know, but something needs to change. But internet costs just do not make sense. So as an example, we have, and I think Tammy would be the best person to talk about this, because he's the one who's handling like the internet bills and stuff. But we have our home internet, which costs, it's over $100. And that's just the home internet, right? I think it's 140 or something. The mobile side, and which, when I compare to what we were paying in South Africa, like, it's not super far off to what we used to spend, just also considering that we are in different countries, we're not in South Africa. But the mobile bills for the internet, I think that does not make sense the most. So we're on a plan right now where you can pay around $35 per person, and that is literally just for receiving calls and SMSs. So there's no internet that is involved in that. You would have to get a separate plan for the internet. And getting a plan that is unlimited for mobile data in Canada specifically, like, it feels like you are asking for the impossible for that to happen. So yeah, like the internet side of things, especially for mobile data, it doesn't make sense, because if you're paying like $35, it's like, it's not a lot, but it's a lot, especially when the South African in me comes in and tries to convert this amount. I'm just like, this does not make sense. So, okay, yeah, Tammy says 149. So it's around the 140 I was saying. And this is for the home internet, right? So after taxes, you end up paying 167. And this is that other thing I've spoken about a couple of times, where the amount that you're paying doesn't involve the tax. So when I'm like 140, it's like, oh, actually the tax is not, it's not optional, you see, like tax is a part of it. So our home family of four, we're paying around 160 per month on the home internet. But for the mobile devices, if you would be looking to get, I think it was the lowest, was it 2 gigs or 4 gigs, Tammy, per month? It was around $70. So I don't think that makes sense. Like it doesn't make sense on any level. But what can we do? Because we already live here and the options are very limited. So okay, if nobody has a question on this particular slide, make sure you take a picture, or you can come back to the video and watch it again so you can get to see the different amounts that are on here. And I just noticed, which I want to make a note of while we are on this live, like I put a point, like a decimal point on here. It was supposed to be a comma. Okay, so don't look at that and think like, what on earth is this number that Lucy was writing on here? This is 39,600 for Montreal at the bottom on there. Okay, so now let's move on to the next super exciting topic. What can I say? Never convert if you're never convert. Like it's difficult, it's hard. I try every single day, but yeah, no, do not convert if you want to have a happy life. Just don't do it. Don't do it. It is not worth it at all. Okay, and then salaries. Let's talk about the money. So from a salaries perspective, right now I have software engineers up, right? We're going to also look at sales representative salaries, truck drivers, software engineers, and nurses. And the website that I want to let you all know about, which is amazing, I absolutely love, is Glassdoor. So if you go to glassdoor.ca, that is where you can be able to look at your particular field. What job titles are you looking for in what province, and get to see what you could expect to make. So if you take this amount and then go back and look at the different provinces and cities, it can give you a better idea of which province or city might make the most sense for you. And one of the things I personally would recommend is like just try and move out of like the more common places, because those ones will tend to be a bit higher just because there's a lot more people who are looking to live there. So it just drives the cost of living up, including the housing, how much housing would cost you. So on the screen right now, we have software engineer salaries. And what I did was search for the salaries and what they would look like if you were living in different cities in the provinces that we just looked at, the top 4 provinces that new immigrants tend to gravitate towards a lot more. So on the top left over here is Ontario. And one thing I want to highlight with how Glassdoor shows you the numbers, it will show you the average, right? So you could find somebody who is getting a bit lower than this average or is on the high end scale. So for example, in Toronto, the average you would be at around 93,000, and your additional compensation, so it could be things like maybe incentives or bonuses, you could be looking at getting 10,000, and that is on average. But the range for it is 2,300 to 47,000, a bit over 47,000 in extra compensation, like bonuses. And then when you look at the top here on the graph, let me just click. Okay, so now you can see my cursor. So if you look at the graph up here, you get to see that the average is 93, but on the lower scale, you could be earning 62,000, or on the highest end of things, you could be earning 140,000. Now you will use your judgment in terms of what experience you have, how many years you've been working in this field, and see where you could fit. And I think this also helps when you have to go into negotiations. So if you are offered something, you know that there are people who are on that high-end scale of 140 in Toronto for this particular job. And Glassdoor gets these salaries directly from people. So if you are working for a company, you can go in and anonymously put in what you make, which I think helps with pay transparency and also helps when you are going into those interviews, so you know what number to work around, right? So the first one, the side is for Toronto, average 93,000. And then the next on the right-hand side, still software engineer salaries, but now we're looking at Vancouver. So you can see that you would be slightly higher than somebody who is based in Toronto if you were a software engineer in Vancouver, just on the average that people have reported. And then if you would be in Montreal, in Quebec, you would be a lot lower than somebody who is in Vancouver. And you can now compare the cost of living as well and say, okay, so if I'm living in this particular province, yes, maybe I pay a bit less. I pay a bit less in housing and all the other expenses that I will have, but now my salary is a bit lower. Does it still make sense if you're looking at that total amount that we looked at that you could potentially need? And then also bear in mind that this amount will still have to have tax deducted from it. So that tax that we spoke about a bit earlier, federal tax and the provincial tax, which will be different, you have to factor that in as well. Some provinces have lower tax brackets than others, or lower tax that they take. So do keep that in mind when you are looking at these numbers and making them make sense. And then the last one is in Calgary, right? So the last one is in Calgary. And then the next job that we are looking at is for sales representatives. So if you are a sales representative in and like I said at the beginning of the video, these were part of the top 10 jobs that a lot of new immigrants come to Canada and work in, right? So sales representatives who are based in Toronto, which is this top side over here, are looking at getting around 48,000, a bit over 48,000. And if you would be in Calgary, you would be getting 53,000. So this, I love the way that it shows. And the reason I do is because it just highlights that it's not just being in Ontario or being in the most busy place where you are likely going to make the most. In the previous one, where we looked at software engineers, so let me just go back, you saw that it was higher in Vancouver and Toronto, right? But now going to sales reps, it's higher, the salaries are higher in Montreal and in Calgary. And I do think that this again is my own opinion and thoughts about it, but I do think that there might be a lot more maybe of the sales representatives who are in Toronto, and that drives what you would get for the salary down. Because if there's a lot more people who are able and have the skills to come into the job and work the job, there's somebody who will be given an offer and they accept something low without even trying to negotiate for more, because maybe there might be a lot of other people who could take on that job. But that's just my thoughts of why it's that way. But this is a very important exercise to go through, just so you know that you are not assuming that your salary is going to be higher purely based on the fact that you are in a big or busy city, right? So yes, so Tammy says amounts may not include bonuses, and that is correct. If you look at the amounts, and when you get on Glassdoor, you will see that this is the average base pay. So the amount that you see on here, that is highlighted in black, that is bigger. That's your base pay. And then just below that over here, that's your average extra or additional pay that you could expect, which for a sales representative in Toronto, it can be an average of around 18,000. So this could be in your bonuses, incentives, whatever that organization offers to sales representatives, maybe commission that you could be getting paid. And the range from what people have reported, it could be as low as 3,000. So depending on the company that you're working for, it could be as low as 3,000 that you can make additional a year, or it could be 100,000. And that is not an exaggeration. Like, don't listen to that 100K number and think, oh my God, that is not impossible. That is not possible. It's an exaggeration. No, it's very much possible. Very, very much possible. So make sure you are looking at all of those amounts and comparing them between different provinces to make it make sense for where you might end up moving. Okay, so the next one that we will be looking at is truck driver salaries. And again, we are looking at them between Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and Calgary. I just picked the top cities just to give you an example. But if you go to glassdoor.ca, that's where you'll be able to search for your specific job title and the province that you would be interested in moving to, or search for these same job roles in a different province if that's something you are looking for. But again, similar information, it's showing you the averages, where you can see that truck drivers are generally going to be getting paid a lot more if they are based in Calgary. right? The average base pay. One of the interesting things that I found though with this one, if you look at the average base pay in Toronto, it's 54,000, right? But if you look at the range for additional cash components, and this is based on 420 salaries that were submitted by people. Like they share the number just below the average base pay. But people's additional cash compensation can be between $252 to $241,000. Where, if you compare it to where the average salary looks like it's higher, which I mean, it is higher from the 137 salaries that have been reported by people who are truck drivers in Calgary, the average in Calgary, the range is between 198 and 46,000. So that's a very big difference. Very, very, very big difference, which I wish there was a plan. If there is a place, because I don't know what I don't know, right? If there is a place that you are aware of where you could potentially compare which companies are paying higher bonuses, because I would like to know, that would be nice info to know before you actually join a company. To say, okay, if there's a company that can give you a cash bonus of up to 200,000 versus a company that is going to give you a cash bonus of up to 40,000, I feel like it's a no-brainer which one you would want to work for, right? It's a no-brainer which one you would want to work for. Okay, so hi, Busi, watching you from Nova Scotia, Canada. Thank you for watching. 6 months here now with hubby and 3 kids and no regrets. Initially planned to go to Alberta, Calgary, but so far so good here. Your videos help me. Oh, thank you so much. Like I love, love, love hearing. When I hear things like this, like I just got goosebumps all over because I absolutely love it when I can help other people avoid pitfalls that we faced, because there wasn't a lot of info coming out, and I would love to. I want to visit Nova Scotia at some point. Like I've heard nothing but amazing things about it, and I do think you picked one of the nicer places to live in. Like even when it comes to a cost of living perspective, Nova Scotia sounds like it is very, very great. Okay, so let's move on to the next and the last of the jobs that we are going to be looking into. So if you do have questions that you're thinking about from the job space, put them in the chat. Make sure you are putting them in the chat. So nurses, these are the salaries for nurses in Canada. Again, we have Ontario right at the top over there, Vancouver next to it. And then right below, we have Montreal, and next to Montreal is Calgary. So if you would be a nurse in Toronto, you are standing to get a higher base pay. So from the numbers that have been submitted, you stand a chance of getting, oh, actually it's in Calgary. But the thing with this number for Calgary, if you look at the amount below the base that's shared, there's only been 10 salaries that have been shared by people. So people in Calgary who are nurses, if you happen to come across this video and you haven't submitted your salary on Glassdoor, please do. It just helps with that pay transparency. And like I said, it's confidential. So no one would ever know that, oh, you shared that you worked for this company and this is how much you made at that company. And then if you look at the number of people who submitted this number for Toronto, it's 121 salaries. But in either case, Glassdoor says they have a very high confidence on this number. So Toronto, Vancouver, and Calgary, they're not looking very bad. Like Montreal as a nurse, like the amount is not looking super high, and this is based on 13 salaries. So it's higher than the amount that was shared for Calgary. So I wonder why there is that much of a difference there. But glassdoor.ca, make sure you are noting that down. I'll also add it in the description of the video so you can find it there much easier if you would like to see that. And yeah, any other questions before we wrap things up? One thing I would also like to highlight is that I have a guide. I have a guide that I created. If you are somebody who's looking to move to Canada, or you're still trying to figure out whether Canada is even the place you want to move to, The title of the guide is Choosing Where to Live in Canada, but the information that is contained on there, it's based on all the years that we've stayed here, things that we've come across living in different areas, and it can help you in just, sifting out, like, is Canada the place? Is Canada the place that makes the most sense? And if it does make the most sense, which place in Canada would make sense for me to move to? So that is in the description. So you can find that guide in the description. So let me stop sharing. Okay. But thank you all so much. Like, I always love having a conversation with you. And again, if you have any questions, this is like, if somebody's still typing, you have like a couple of seconds just to put that in so we can have a conversation and discuss it. But that is the cost of living in Canada in the top 4 provinces that a lot of immigrants tend to move to when they are moving to Canada. And I shared about the top cities that you can live in and what the cost of living looks like, just comparing things between those provinces. And when you look at the salaries, I want you to answer this question for yourself. Does it make sense? Does it make sense for you to pack everything up and move to Canada? And do you still think, when you hear maybe people, if you're one of the people who've heard someone say, oh, living in Canada is super expensive, do you still think that is the case? Because a very big component of that conversation that I always find is the fact that the salaries are never mentioned. Somebody will never mention how much they are making or how much you could make depending on the type of job that you do, and then comparing that to the standard of living. It's usually a direct comparison with where the person lived before they moved to Canada. So Christopher says, thank you so much for sharing. You are very much welcome. And again, I'd like to thank all of you for joining me live today. And I will see you on the next video.
Thank you for watching.